I guess we'll get started. Since all of our Zoomers seem to have bailed. Huh? No? So we'll
moved it back an hour and they still can't get up.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Guess who showed up? Good morning.
Well, yeah, look who's not here.
I was talking to Bob.
Yeah, see, showed it.
Okay, well, we just started. You didn't miss anything yet. Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah, I was putting myself on mute, sorry.
Basically, we're going to talk about modulation, which is actually how you add information to a radio wave by either changing its amplitude or its frequency or its phase, or all the above in some cases. When we talk about the VHF, UHF, and above, we're typically going to use FM modulation. In some cases, maybe phase modulation, but mostly you'll be dealing with frequency modulation with a handy-talkie and a repeater, or point-to-point, from handy-talkie to handy-talkie. And what that means is you change the frequency of the carrier signal in proportion to the amplitude of your voice. And the rate at which it changes will be proportional to the frequency change of your voice. But it should transmit a constant amplitude signal. And if it doesn't, one of the things that happens in a receiver is they have a thing called a limiter, which kind of forces it to be a constant amplitude, because it's turns out to be very hard to they never use the term demodulate an FM signal if it has amplitude variations. So you only want to see the frequency variations. Any questions about FM modulation? Should be straightforward, just change the frequency.
Yeah.
It's harder to do it than it is to say it. But here's a comparison of what an amplitude, or AM, like your AM radio signal, looks like, where the carrier amplitude is changed proportional to your voice. So the amplitude of your voice increases the amplitude or decreases the amplitude of the carrier signal. So you see this, what they call an envelope, this little dotted line around the thing. And that's in the actual receiver. You'll have what you call an envelope detector. And all you're going to do is integrate the carrier out. So all you see is that envelope waveform. In the case of FM, which is down below, you can see that the frequency of that sine wave is changing from a low frequency to a high frequency back. And it's compared to the same modulating signal on the AM.
You can tell the difference on your AM radio and your FM radio, right? So AM, this is AM, I guess anymore, but static and hash and noise you hear because that's amplitude interference, and that's why you hear it on FM, because it's a constant amplitude. That's why your FM radio sounds so clean and distinct, unless you get out of range. But
and it also tends to be a much wider bandwidth, so you get much more high fidelity on FM.
So it's great for our handhelds at FM, because it's a much cleaner sounding signal than AM would be. Sound like your AM radio, have much static on top of people, not
Mhm.
fun to listen to.
But the other thing we'll get to a little bit is with FM, because of the way it operates, you only hear the strongest signal. So if there's two signals, one's larger than the other, you'll only hear the largest one, and you won't hear the other one in the background. On AM or single sideband, which is AM, you hear everything, including static. So you can hear somebody clear and somebody not so clear, and static and lightning discharges, and that's a big difference between AM and FM. So, which type of modulation is commonly used for VHF and UHF voice repeaters?
Hmm. Delta.
Delta. Okay, there's a thing called packet radio where we send digital information in the form of packets. So it's like a message. Think of basically sending a letter. So it has an address, who you're sending it to, it has who it's from, it has the contents of the letter. Packet is kind of a digital representation of that. And we do it with using what we call, since it's binary, we're sending ones and zeros, we call them marks and spaces, where a mark represents a 1 or true, and a space is a 0. In the VHF world, you usually run in the 1200 baud range. And they have kind of standardized on this 2200 hertz for the space and 1200 hertz for the mark. So you're actually sending two tones, where it's a form of FM or frequency shift keying, what they call it. So for a space, you're going to send a 2200 hertz tone to modulate it. And for the mark, you're going to send 1200. So it's either this or this. Do you have any more packets? Because I've never really used packets.
Associated with the computer typically, or doesn't have to be a computer, they make custom design packet encoder decoders that you can run separate from the computer. It costs as much as a computer, so
Yeah.
just use a computer.
That's the
But,
TNC, right?
yeah,
They call it
terminal node controller,
something like that.
But so that was like, other than Morse code, continuous wave, was, you could say, in form of digitals on and off, type. This is really one of the first digital modes that became popular in ham radio. I played with it like in 1988, 1990, is why, because computers were becoming more common at home around that time. So that's one of the first, and there's tons of other digital modes now. I'm talking about digital modes, but that was one of the first. And there's still pocket of ham operators that use packet, and some people never touch packet their whole life. So that's true of many of the digital modes. Sometimes you gravitate to one and don't use a lot of the others, but it's still around.
Yeah.
And 1200 hertz, well, what was the, that's the frequency, right? That's
The market space.
The baud, 1200 baud, I was thinking of. Really isn't all that, it sounds slow, because back when we used to have these modems on our computers, 1200 baud is crawling. But in the digital modes, I don't think it's all that slow, really, compared to many of the other.
And actually,
recent digital modes are like the same.
That's one of the recent changes where there was a limitation by baud rate on the different frequencies, particularly HF, and they've now changed that to bandwidth. And I don't remember all the details.
They don't care what the baud rate is association, but higher the baud rate, usually more bandwidth it takes up on the spectrum. But they just, forget the baud rate, as long as you don't exceed this bandwidth, if you transmission, who cares about the baud rate really? So you have some flexibility in the baud rate.
So what type of modulation is commonly used for VHF packet radio transmission?
Alpha.
You were paying attention.
And I wasn't listening to you.
So it's still FM, frequency, modulating the frequency, which means putting the intelligence on the changing frequency, and the difference between voice and packet is
Right.
your voice is being superimposed on the changing frequency, whereas in packet it's the 1200 and 2200 tones instead of the voice that are being applied to the.
Because in this case, we're sending digital information.
Yeah.
So, it's
Instead of a voice.
right where somebody might be typing it in.
Mm-hmm.
So it's probably converted to ASCII equivalent and the ones and zeros for that.
So that's strictly what a packet radio is, just like Morse code or whatever. It's
Yeah,
all
so that's
digital.
a
There's no
terminal
voice.
node controller or whatever you want to say, or your
Okay.
computer. You still have your transceiver, transmitter, receiver,
Mhm.
transceiver, whatever it is, could be handled, but. So this terminal node controller or your computer is supplying the changing digital signal, those tones, that's where that's coming from.
Oh,
And you're
still-
sending messages.
Still gonna have to transmit, but it sends it out.
Okay, so, and I don't know why we don't start with amplitude modulation first, but
It seems the simplest mode.
the book did it and I followed it. Amplitude modulation is kind of the simplest, where we talked about it. You vary the amplitude of the carrier proportional to what we call the baseband signal, which would be your voice or whatever you're using to modulate it. It could also be a digital input to modulate it, which effectively is what CW is. You're either turning the carrier on or off completely. Instead of proportional to your voice, it's on or off for a period of time, representing a dit or a dot. Dit or dot. Single sideband is basically a subset of amplitude modulation. If we generate an AM signal, you have your carrier and two sidebands we call upper and lower sideband. So the modulating signal, say your voice, is duplicated on the upper sideband and a mirror of it on the lower sideband. So you have all three of those. If you look on the spectrum, I don't know if I have one. Yeah, there's one coming up. And you'll have all three of those what do we call it on the spectrum? It's not a waveform. Whatever they are. We'll see when you show the picture. When we do single sideband, and one of the reasons there's a difference is all of your power, say you're transmitting 100 watts, that 100 watts is distributed through that entire waveform, which is 6 kilohertz wide or wider, depending on the AM. When we go to single sideband, we eliminate one of the sidebands and the carrier. So now that 100 watts is in a much smaller portion of the band. So its signal to noise ratio is much higher because the bandwidth, which determines how much noise is in your signal, is much narrower. Huh?
Clear as mud, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we typically use single sideband for long distance because of the narrower bandwidth, and it's better for weak signals.
Even though you're going more distance, you still get a little more static, correct? Or
Well, you're going to get
less-
static
less-
with any form of amplitude modulation.
Any form of AM,
Right.
but single sideband gives you the bandwidth to
It's
push it.
narrower bandwidth, so you don't get as much noise because you're only looking at 3 kilohertz.
Right, certain signal. So you could technically go several hundred miles with single sideband if you had the antenna array to do it, correct?
On VHF and UHF, I've heard like 300, is it miles or kilometers?
Miles.
Okay, so. if you were
With
single-
propagation, which
Yeah.
is
Yeah,
not
I mean,
reliable.
But on HF, you can go anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
With single sideband.
You go all the way around and come back to yourself. On like 40, 80 meters. So which of the following is a form of amplitude modulation?
See,
Which type of voice mode is often used for long distance or weak signal contacts on the VHF and UHF bands?
single sideband.
You ever done single sideband on VHF?
I haven't. I've never had a 2 meter or 77 meter VHF UHF bands. I've never had a 2 meter, 77 meter transceivers that had single sideband function, like your handhelds
Oh,
are FM only, but they sell.
I'll have to try it. 'Cause my 9700 will do it. I just never tried it.
100 has on 2 meters, I mean, repeaters and all that. But you can do sideband, of course, repeaters don't understand sideband because they're FM, but point to point, ham to ham.
Mhm.
People do that where it's still a little more or less line of sight because it's VHF and UHF. Not a lot of signal bouncing around in the ionosphere, so it's more line of sight, but. So people do that. Steel just don't have
Single
single.
sideband, here is the distance. Off that distance.
But we can't do single sideband previously,
No,
so we'll have to get a.
You have to get a single sideband in the UHF, VHF range. Right?
Exactly, yeah.
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 And there's.
but when you get your general license,
Mhm.
then you can get a base station and do all that stuff.
So with the technical, you can't have a base station? Or
You can have one, but you can only operate on 10 meters and up.
10 meters and up, you can't operate on.
And it's a small section on 10 meters where you can use single sideband. Little subband.
They could do it on, with a technician on, 2 meters and 77 meters, we can be sideband if we have a radio.
I'm not sure who you talk to, especially around here.
Yeah, there's probably. Not a lot of people out there with sideband rigs on.
Our
2 meters.
goal is- They live in Rockledge,
Mhm.
and we're on Merritt Island, and our goal is to be able to talk to each other in case there's an emergency.
Right.
So that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Well, yeah,
You
but maybe. I
might
guess-
get their simplex definitely with the repeater.
Yeah, they tried it simplex and it's just not going all the way.
And that may be just the antenna, you know,
Yeah.
the antennas yet, but probably on the handheld antennas. That can be challenging. We do that every fourth Saturday of every month. We have simplex tests, and so I'll just try that with the club.
That's
Who we
what
can
we
reach.
want- that's what we want to see.
Yeah, so but with it's possible with a handheld of 5 watts, you have an antenna that's 15 or 20 feet up. You can probably hit right on the Coco. So it's all about the antenna, I think. Maybe more power would help, but you got, like, I have a dual band rig made for mobile, right? And many people do this, but I just leave it in the shack or at home. I can take it mobile if I want to, but I kind of leave it in there. So I have up to 50 watts. But I've got a antenna in the attic. It's probably 12, 13 feet high, but I can hit. I can hit Cocoa Beach and the Rockledge and people in Merritt Island. Simplex not going through the repeater just because
You are going through the repeater?
not going through the repeater.
No,
So,
simplex, okay,
Yeah.
that's point to point.
yeah, so I mean, so the only difference is with the handhelds are typically 5 watts max, some are 8 watts, but so really your best bet is the antenna becomes important. But if you get a dual band or a base station 2 meter, at your house that runs 50 watts or something more than you definitely really helps you out.
That's what I was looking at, the single sideband thing at the distance, what we look out already was perfect.
Okay.
Those are perfect when you get the antennas out of the roof.
So, but on that-
Simplex point.
Right.
Yeah, join that simplex test, not to be a club member, everything for Saturday,
Yeah.
usually 9 o'clock, so. I do different stuff every month, so like sometimes I use my base rate 50 watts, that's I assume I'm gonna hit a lot of people, because that's the best I've got, but then I'll take my handheld, hook it to the to my better antenna, so I'm gonna run firewalls and see what I can do. The last Saturday, I had some kind of problem with my antenna on my main rig, so I went handheld. And Bob, you guys were handheld here.
Yeah, we were right out here in
Oh,
the
that's,
parking lot.
we were talking to you.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right,
So,
because we had the antennas here and we were.
so
Yeah,
I did. So
But I had that, my J pole on a little tripod out there in the parking lot and was able to get most everybody.
See, I heard you, and I was up in North Merritt Island, so I'm 2 miles north of Barstow.
Well, that's who you were talking to standing right here. Because you
So
were
there's
you were
like-
connected this
Yeah,
to the,
although on that one, I was actually going through the repeater,
okay,
the one that was loud and clear.
yeah. Now, where do you do these meetings? These
Just from
meetings?
your house, it's just.
Oh,
one-
you're just at your house,
It's on-
you're just trying,
Yeah, on 147.2 is a non-repeater frequency. That's the Indian River standard simplex frequency, 147.42.
4.2.
That's it, right?
I think I printed,
So that's-
I think I printed those up.
In the fourth Saturday, 9 o'clock, that Steve, president, he
It's,
manages it.
it's called TAC C, I believe.
Taxi.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then
There's a,
listen to-
there's a national calling frequency and then there's some tactical channels associated with it.
Cool to listen. I found the frequency for the weather. What is it, 166?
162 something.
Yes, 162,550.
Mhm.
And I can go stand outside and I can listen to them talk about the radio,
Yeah,
you know, but I
that
was
works.
trying to pick up something else.
Okay, we talked about single sideband and the fact that it's one of the sidebands and you can choose upper or lower sideband. They kind of default, although there's nothing that says you have to follow the rules. But below 10 megahertz, typically you use lower sideband and above you use upper sideband. It's kind of a convention. And it just came about because in the early days, because of they normally use the 9 megahertz intermediate frequency, it was easier to generate it that way. And it just kind of more or less followed on. So 20 meters through all your VHF and microwave is normally going to be upper sideband. And your lower bands, 160, 80, 40. They didn't throw 60 in there because that's such
It is
a
upper
weird
side.
one. Oh, is it upper?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's really weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a weird band. Yeah.
Are normally lower sideband. Now, another exception on digital modes like FT8, FT4 and those, they're upper sideband regardless where you're operating. And it's actually an upper sideband digital mode.
So most transceivers nowadays are smart enough to know that you're below or above 10 megahertz, so it automatically set that for you.
Wow.
Sometimes you can manually override it, like you're gonna go do digital. And it's on 40-meter digital, 40 meters usually lower sideband, but Bob said you have to go to upper, so I have to override my rig and say I have to go upwards if you're digital. And you might leave it that way and forget about it, come back and want to be sideband, and you forgot that you moved it to upper sideband on 40 meters lower. Doesn't do any harm, although you're not gonna be able to tune
I
anybody
have a
in.
question.
Telling your rig.
Okay.
Am I understanding this correctly, that the 60 meters is the upper sideband?
That's what Dan said. I think he's right. But 60, we don't talk about much because it's kind of weird. And it's not, we're not primary on
Okay.
60.
All right.
So it's kind of what, military and other stuff and foreign and
Shared frequency,
Yeah, we have to yield right away.
we have fixed channels.
yes, divided up into channels that are what,
There are 5 channels in the range and
they're narrow.
they are narrow, and you have to be careful. I mean, the way the chart is set up, the chart tells you what frequency you would transmit up on, based on if you're doing CW or digital, or if you're doing upper sideband. Because
But
you
you
can't,
can't know where you're at in the channel.
Yeah,
You know,
because once you use an upper sideband, it changes, so.
Okay.
I've only made one contact on 60 meters, and that was a
I just thought it was kind of strange because it skipped that.
Yeah, 60 is a weird duck. And it usually doesn't show up in any of the contests and things like that.
Yeah.
Normally 60 is not a channel that you can use.
Okay,
And I don't think it comes up on any of the exams until either the general or extra. There's some questions about it, just so you know what it is.
Those are on the extra.
Yeah.
some older used rigs, if you don't get something new, may not even have 60 meters available on the rig. But depending on its vintage.
So here's the chart I was referring to. And at the top, we're showing what we call the baseband signal. That's whatever you're using to modulate it. In the case of your handy talkie, that would be your voice. That's in that 3-4 kilohertz band. Because that's what normal voice spectrum is. Women are towards the high end. There's not a lot of energy up in the higher frequencies, although it does help for intelligibility, which is why FM, which is what, 15 kilohertz, is much clearer. But one of the reasons I think they standardized on the 3 kilohertz is from the telephone industry with hardline. And your old hardline telephones were actually limited to 3 kilohertz because there was sufficient voice information in 3 kilohertz and they needed the bandwidth.
Try to play music through your old landline phone, it didn't sound very good on the other end,
Mm,
because most of it's higher than 3 kilohertz.
Now, I'm assuming that cell phones have a wider bandwidth because they sound, but I don't know. The next one is a full amplitude modulation, and you see in the center is your carrier frequency, whatever you're tuned to. Let's say it was 7 point something megahertz in the 40 meter band. And you've got an upper side band and a lower side band, which is this baseband signal that's shifted up. So, and it's mirrored. So frequency increases on the upper side band and it decreases on the lower side band, which is why if you're listening on to an upper sideband signal and you're on lower sideband, you're not going to understand it because the frequency is inverted. And when we do single sideband, we usually by filtration get rid of the carrier and a sideband, and you pick whichever one, either upper or lower.
Because on that full AM modulation one, the information on the lower and the upper is identical.
Duplicate.
mhm.
You only need one, you need both. So if I can detach one of the sidebands, I got all the information I need, so that's why Bob was saying it's you're pouring power into that one sideband, you're pouring power into the center frequency. So if you suppress that center frequency and get rid of one of the sidebands.
Now,
you
the
got-
one
still have-
disadvantage on single sideband, since you no longer have that carrier to tune to, it's very easy on an AM signal and you tune for the carrier. When you're doing single sideband, there's no reference. So as you tune towards that signal, you're shifting the frequency of it. So you get the Donald Duck sound or the guy in the barrel, and it's much harder to tune in a single sideband signal than it is an AM.
Something that he pointed out a while ago is, actually, I think it was Jack that said you put it on upper sideband and then change. And then all of a sudden, you're listening to something on lower sideband and you're not gonna be able to hear what people are saying. You can hear a noise there,
Mhm.
or less you can on my radio, but it sounds like Charlie Brown's teacher.
Mhm.
That's walk walk.
Yeah, And then, so when you hear that sound, that's a dead giveaway that you need to check. And make sure you're.
So operational, to me, just my habit, but if I'm on an upper sideband, which means 10 megahertz or above, right? So 20 meters, 15 meters, just the bands, HF bands and bands operate on. I'll tune from the bottom of the band up because I'm coming up on that, on the upper sideband. I'm tuning up to find that. Left
Where
sideband
the
low.
carrier would normally
Yeah,
be.
but no, I find that easier to tune in if I'm on 40 meters or 80 meters or lower than 10 megahertz. I tune from the top of the band down because I'm coming up that bottom,
Okay.
and I just found that easier to tune in.
Okay.
Because I'm tuning from the bottom of the band up on the lower side band, the bottom chart. I gotta go over that whole pump that goes up like this and drops. I gotta go through all that, it's all garbled until I get to the right side of it, just look at the chart, so it's very easy. To me, I just find it easier to tune that way.
And a couple hundred hertz makes a big difference in how it sounds. Okay, which sideband is normally used for 10-meter HF, VHF, and UHF single sideband communications? Brenda?
Alpha.
Very good. Just want to make sure you weren't sleeping.
Not yet.
We mentioned before that FM has much better sounding audio, much higher fidelity, basically because of the bandwidth, where you're like 15 kilohertz and an AM signal. Unstable internet. Is much narrower than that. Single sideband is yet again narrower than AM because you're only doing one of the sidebands, so it's 3 kilohertz wide, where your AM in the amateur bands is going to be 6 kilohertz because it's got both sidebands, and the width of the carrier is theoretically 0. In the VHF, UHF range with a repeater or your handy talkie, you're looking to 10 to 15 kilohertz. Now there's also a narrow FM, which is, what that sound like 10 or below, but I'm not sure if you can use that with a,
It's like half of those, but
yeah,
it's 5, 7.5.
I'm not sure if you can use that with a regular wideband FM or not. I would assume it would just be sort of compressed.
Yeah, it wouldn't be clear, I think.
What's a characteristic of single sideband compared to FM?
Charlie?
Sounds good. It's definitely not easier to tune. What is the approximate bandwidth of a typical single sideband voice signal?
Bravo.
Bravo. What is the approximate bandwidth of a VHF repeater FM voice signal? Anybody out there?
Okay, I lost your voice there for a minute.
Oh. It said our internet was unstable, so maybe you're.
I would say Charlie.
Let's see. You guessed
Oh.
right.
Yeah, it
It wasn't a guess, right? You knew it, right? Okay, one of the disadvantages, which I talked about before, of FM compared to single sideband is you can only hear one signal at a time. And it's due to what they call the capture effect, the way FM demodulation works. So you only hear the stronger signal. I'm not exactly sure what happens if you got two that are the same. But most cases you won't hear but a single signal unless you really are in the noise. And even then,
If you're on a repeater and you're checking into a net or whatever, that all the time, you know, some networks, people check in. The two go at the same time, we call that, you doubled on someone, two, but the net control operator typically only hears one person.
Mhm.
And so if you're the one transmitting and you come off and you didn't hear,
right,
you're transmitting, so your receiver is on, you can't hear the other person who's transmitting at the same time as you. And that control only heard the other guy because he was stronger. And you come back waiting and it's kind of sensible. Net control guy never really acknowledged me, or I'm not sure I was heard. You know, well, that's why. So sometimes you got to check in again because they never heard you.
Which is-
neither did anybody else.
which is why the protocol is that you say this is, and then unkey the mic for a second or two in case somebody else is trying to talk at the same time and you'll hear them. And then you say your call sign. So it gives you a better chance of not doubling, although you could still both be doing it exactly the same.
Could happen.
Which of the following is a disadvantage of FM compared to single sideband?
Well, it's D or D. I don't even see if it was D or five.
Well, let's see. FM signals are not harder to tune.
Uh-uh.
They're much easier, so that one's out.
Okay.
And
You know,
FM has much better voice quality, so that one's out. So obviously it's not all these choices, which
mhm.
only leaves Bravo.
Bravo, right.
Now, one of the reasons that's an advantage on single sideband is in, I guess, pileups and contesting where you got a lot of people and you can hear more than one at a time. Not sure how you sort them out, but some people are good at it. Okay, so there's also some other modes that I'm not sure why they say is wide bandwidth, but the AM fast scan TV, which you can use as an amateur, is approximately 6 megahertz wide, the same as AM voice. And it's used to be referred to as NTSC, which stood for the National Television Standards Committee. And that was your TV signal that you got with your antenna over the air. Which, are they still broadcasting on the air? I guess.
I don't even have a TV antenna up anymore. I used it until.
I know they tried to force everybody to
3 or 4
digital.
years.
Yeah, I don't think they basically broadcasting a commercial analog, it's commercial digital, but the amateurs still do analog.
Excuse me, I have a question. Why are they forcing everybody to digital?
Narrower bandwidth, leaves more room in the spectrum.
As good as answer as any. So what is the approximate bandwidth of an AM fast scan TV transmission?
Test on TV transmission. Bravo.
Sounds good.
Oh,
Now see if you had a base station, you could do TV back and forth across the river. If you, I guess all you need is AM capability, right?
Yeah, and I don't know what kind of
Well, you gotta have some kind of
camera.
program, yeah,
Mhm.
camera input.
So locally, the LISAT, LISAT group, there's a group called, please look it up, just Google that, LISAT, it's Launch Information Services and Amateur Television Group. They have a 2-meter repeater, but they broadcast the audio for launch, all the launches that go on.
Oh, right.
So they tell us go on, but they're also an amateur television group, but last I heard, they actually have an amateur television repeater. And so there's some amateur television stuff going on, but all the repeater was down, But they said if it was up, you could receive with an old analog TV without a digital converter, I mean, one of the old analog TVs. On some channel, I forget what channel, but channel 6 or 7 or something like that, and some kind of UHF antenna, even one you use for 7 centimeter. You could pick up the video. So, but anyway, go to the LISAT site.
Okay.
I don't know what the web address really is, but it was Google on that, Launch Information Services and Television, if you're interested in, amateur television stuff, but if anything's really going on, that's another mode that's not used a lot, but we have the capability and the license authority to do this. It's
Yeah.
fun to play with. That's on the higher, typically on the UHF frequencies, which technicians have the right to do, so they don't do it, so.
What type of transmission is indicated by the term NTSC? Charlie,
Yeah, Charlie.
okay, CW, we mentioned it before. It's another name for Morse code. Although Morse code is the way in which you modulate the carrier, and CW really means continuous wave. They have a much narrower bandwidth. As far as the test question, they say 150 hertz. I think it's actually narrower than that in most cases, but you need to remember 150 hertz. And you have CW privileges even down on 80 meters. So even though it's no longer required, there seems to be a lot more interest in Morse code. People are doing more of it because
Yeah.
of the much narrower bandwidth, you can get longer distances. On much less power. Most of the people doing QRP, the really serious ones, are doing it with Morse code on 5 watts and, making contacts halfway around the world.
4:30. Okay.
So every time Morse code, they're actually tapping that?
Yeah. Yeah. And you have CW privileges on VHF and UHF also. Although you can't do it with your handy talkie, I don't think. At least not most of them. So what is CW?
Delta.
Very good. Which of the following types of signal has the narrowest bandwidth?
Bravo? That was a guess.
No, remember, single sideband is 3 kilohertz.
You're right, yeah. So that would be the FM, the alpha.
Well, so which has the narrowest? Remember, FM voice was 10 to 15. Remember what slow scan was?
No, that's over, I don't remember.
Actually, we didn't talk about slow scan. We talked about fast scan.
Oh, really?
They're trying to confuse you,
That's why I don't remember.
but it's still wider than CW.
Okay.
GW will get you places where you can't get any other time, in fact. That's why they use spark gap transmitters on the Titanic. Because there is no sideband. Just this carrier.
What's the approximate bandwidth required to transmit a CW signal?
Hmm. Delta?
I think so.
Yeah, you weren't paying attention, were you?
No, I was listening to you talk. Let's see, that would be Bravo?
Bravo.
So one thing about CW being continuous wave, and you turn the carrier on and off,
Mhm.
there really is no modulation. You're not superimposing any intelligence. And so when on FM, AM, or single sideband, you are superimposing your voice on those, that's why that creates a wide band. This wave is so narrow,
Mhm.
there really isn't. There isn't any modulation, it's just turning the carrier on and off, so. I don't know if that helps, John, and CW is the narrowest of those
See that?
four, obviously.
Okay, so we can send Morse code with what we call a straight key, which is your old fashioned like telegraph key, and you hold it down for a 1 period for a dit and 3 periods for a da. And kind of keep all that straight and have 5 periods between and 7 between words and 1 between dits and das, and it takes a lot of practice. There's also what's called a paddle, which usually has 2 sets of contacts. I think I've seen some where it's a single paddle and you push it left or right to make a dit or a da. Either way, the paddle generates dits and das separately, and you normally feed that to what we call electronic keyer. Some transceivers have that capability built in instead of having an external box. So when you press the paddle for a dit, it will send repeating as long as you hold it. It'll go dit 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 dit. Likewise, the other direction or the other paddle, and it'll go da da da. So you have to learn timing. So it's very different than tapping up and down and doing the timing yourself. Where on the paddle, you just have to be able to know when to let go for how many dits or how many das, because it does the timing and spacing for you. So it's much better code, but from what I understand, it's much harder to learn how to do. And they all recommend you start with a straight key. Although I would think that that's still a big learning curve to go from one to the other.
Yeah, yeah, just based on my own experience. I was sending my call sign in 20 minutes with a paddle. Paddle. Straight key with different story altogether.
Yeah,
That takes a lot more effort to learn, but. There's 2 camps. Some people say start with a straight key, other people say it's easier to just get started with the iambic paddle. The difference between the 2 is with the iambic paddle, everything's automatic, depending on which paddle you press, and the only thing you're really doing is putting the space in the middle. With the straight key, your timing is critical on everything, so learning the rhythm, trying to pen, I think we talked about the meter of poetry,
Yes.
Yeah.
the name for that.
iambic
But-
pentameter, which
Yeah.
is one of the things.
So, but that's critical. So I have heard people say poets pick it up easier, the straight key, and musicians pick it up easier.
Makes sense.
It's the way you're supposed to learn it, is learning the sound of the letters, not the fact that it's a da and two dits for a D. It's a da-da-dit, and you learn those, and you have to do it at higher speeds where they're close enough together that it makes a distinctive sound. If you're listening to it at a couple words a minute, it doesn't. It just sounds like separated dits and dots.
There's a lot of Morse code, shorthand, if you will, that hands use.
Mhm.
You know, there's no sense sending all the letters for some word like thanks is TNX. You
Mhm.
don't have to spell out THANK, it takes longer. So thanks, I don't know, give me some. For FOR, we said FER.
Mhm.
Same did stuff, because it goes da 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 and E's a bit. So it's
Okay.
sort of thinking, so all that kind of stuff, and so
Yeah.
you'll hear not only the letters, but you'll hear those words after
Mm.
a while. You'll hear the T and X, when you know that as a phrase, so we have to go listen to the letters, it's like someone's sending their city. You don't know what city to expect, there's no shortcut, so you just listen to the individual letters if you're listening. A lot of the other general stuff like location, you get into a lot of the Q codes.
Mm.
You know, the whole Q code listing was really created for
Right.
Morse code, it's all abbreviations, QTH is location. So you could say my QTH instead of spelling out LOCATION, you just, so anyway, there's a whole little bit mini language there too.
Mhm.
You can send everything out. And someone can still understand what you're saying, but anyway, but because those things are so repetitive, you start to even hear words,
Mhm.
unless it's a word you do not expect someone's name, the city name, you can't, you don't know what to expect, but so it's fun.
Most of these shortcuts actually came out of the old telegraph days. Like, you've seen 73 a lot,
Mhm.
means best regards. It's a lot shorter than typing out best regards.
Huh.
Okay, so what is an electronic keyer?
Charlie,
Charlie. Okay, so we learned that VHF, UHF repeaters normally use FM or PM. It's really hard to tell the difference from a listening standpoint. I understand the human ear can't tell the difference. Single sideband is a special case of amplitude modulation, where we're only transmitting one sideband. And we use upper sideband above 10 megahertz and lower sideband below 10 megahertz. It has a narrower bandwidth than FM. It's approximately 3 kilohertz, where FM is 10 to 15. Fast scan color TV is a form of amplitude modulation. This happens to have a video signal. And it's also called NTSC, which is, I'm sure that committee is still active because government committees never go away. It's 6 megahertz wide. CW is another form of amplitude modulation called continuous wave. And you either, like Jack said, you don't actually modulate the signal, or you could say it's 100% modulation. You turn it on and off. It's 150 kilohertz, whoops, 150 hertz wide. Typo. And you use an electronic keyer to assist in manually sending better Morse code.